Hello, everybody, and welcome to another review. As this time we have quite a blast from the past. It's WCW Wrestle War 1991. This show took place back on February 24th, 1991. Wow, 31 years ago this month. Darn, I feel old. And I remember I was in 8th grade at the time, and one of my classmates actually loaned me the videotape that Friday after the pay-per-view took place, and I got to watch it over the weekend. I don't know how many times, but I was so thrilled to see it, and what a good show this turned out to be. Also, this was WCW's first, not only their first pay-per-view of 1991, but it was also the first pay-per-view since the late Dusty Rhodes had come in and took over the booking, as previous booker Ole Anderson was shown the door by the end of 1990, thanks to Jim Herd, or as I call him numerous times, Jim Turd, who didn't know shit about wrestling. And speaking of Dusty, he and Jim Ross commentated the show, and we opened up with a match for the six-man tag team championship, which had been brought back after being inactive in the previous Jim Crockett Promotions, which was bought out by Ted Turner, which we knew as WCW. As we saw, the State Patrol, Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker and Lieutenant James Earl Wright team up with the Big Cat, who also later became Mr. Hughes, as they did battle with Wildfire Tommy Rich, Ricky Morton, and the Junkyard Dog. Now, Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker later became the trainer at the WCW Power Plant years later. And as I mentioned, Big Cat went on to become Mr. Hughes, whose real name's Curtis Hughes. And the six-man tag team title was brought back like maybe a month before the show took place. They said that Morton, Rich, and JYD won it at the Omni in Atlanta, Georgia on a show. Early going, Morton hits a Japanese arm drag on Lieutenant James Earl Wright. State Patrol and Big Cat eventually punish Morton, and Morton's the face in peril. Cat hits an impressive dropkick on Morton. Parker power slams Morton before getting tagged to the Junkyard Dog. JYD hits the power slam on Parker, but Big Cat interrupts the count. But then Morton gets on top of Parker and gets the 3 count, enabling he, Rich, and the JYD to retain the six-man tag team championship. Later that year, they would create championship belts for the six-man tag team championship. Then we see Tony Schiavone in the arena on a platform interviewing Terry Taylor with Alexandra York. Alexandra York, of course, for those who don't know, that was Terry Runnels, who eventually married Dustin Rhodes. And about a month before this show had taken place at a Clash of Champions, Taylor had joined the York Foundation. I gotta say it right now. The York Foundation, in my opinion, the worst faction in wrestling history. I called them the Yuck Foundation. And the stupid thing was, Taylor had joined the York Foundation a month before this, replacing the man he was previously feuding with, Michael Wallstreet. That made no darn sense. Michael Wallstreet, of course, that was Mike Rotunda. He had left WCW and months later went off to the WWF as Irwin R. Shyster, IRS. But Taylor and York talked about Taylor's no disqualification match with the Z-Man later in the show. York made a prediction that Taylor would win the match in less than a particular time. I forgot the time she said, and Taylor predicted pain. Then we go on to our second match as we see Brad Armstrong go one-on-one with Bobby Eaton of Midnight Express fame. The funny thing is, as Bobby's music starts, you hear pre-recorded chants of Bobby, or should I say so, way before years later when Goldberg came along. The Goldberg chants equaled Memorex. Early going, Brad hits a nice head scissor takedown and a monkey flip and had an early advantage working on Bobby's arm. Eaton eventually hits a clothesline to take over, Had a slingshot backbreaker off the ropes. He puts Brad in abdominal stretch, and here's a shock. The late Randy Anderson, who refereed this match, he went through Armstrong's legs and catches Bobby grabbing the rope. Eventually, Bobby hit a swinging neck breaker and the Alabama Jam leg drop from the top rope to pick up the victory. Great battle between, two great workers and two great wrestlers, and it's unfortunate both men have since passed away. Even the referee, Randy Anderson, has died as well. But this kind of helped propel Bobby as a solo competitor, because he had been previously labeled a tag wrestler throughout the 80s as a member of the Midnight Express. Next up was a women's tag team matchup, as we had women wrestlers from Japan. Not sure if they were from Old Japan or New Japan, but we saw a combination of Miss A and Miki Honda. She didn't spell it like the car company, as they did battle with Mimi or Mami Kitamura and Itsuki Yamasaki. Yamasaki was one half of the Jumping Bomb Angels and was one of the, as they were, of course, Yamasaki one half of the WWF Women's Tag Team Champions in the late 80s. Honda was hitting some stiff kicks on Kitamura. Kitamura hit a back elbow off the second rope on Honda. Honda gets the stiff kicks on Yamazaki. Miss A hit a cradle suplex on Kitamura, and Yamazaki ended up pinning Honda with a victory roll to win the match. The fans seemed to be into this matchup for some reason. Well, not for some reason, but I can understand it was a very good matchup. And they were into the Bobby-Brad match previously. They didn't really seem to care for the six-man tag that opened the show. Up next, we see Nature Boy Buddy Landel go up against the Natural Dustin Rhodes. I don't think these two really clicked in the ring. Dustin eventually hits a press slam followed by the Bulldog to pin Landel and pick up the victory. Then we see in the back Missy Hyatt says she's going to be the first woman to interview a wrestler. She goes into the door and she sees Stan the Lariat Hansen, and Stan grabs a hold of her and he's trying to giving her a spanking and throws her out the door. And Tony Schiavone, they see Tony Schiavone on the interview platform in the arena. He can't help but laugh. He says, "Oh, Missy." And he tried so hard not to laugh, but he still did. Next matchup, we saw tag team a match, as we saw the Royal Family, Jack Victory and Rip Morgan, do battle with the Young Pistols, Tracy Smothers and Steve Armstrong. This was a battle of repackaged tag teams. The Royal Family, previously known as the New Zealand Militia, while the Young Pistols, previously known as the Southern Boys. I wonder if they got complaints, considering when they were wrestling as the Southern Boys, they had the Confederate flag on their trunk. So I don't know if they got complaints about that and had to be repackaged. And I guess they call themselves the Young Pistols because they didn't want to get sued by the creators of the Young Guns movies. During this match, a huge shocker, the power in the arena, the lights went out, and eventually put a spotlight back in the ring, and by the time the match was over, the lights were back on, and good double team moves by the Pistols. The end came when the Royal Family went for a double front suplex, and Steve dropkicks Jack Victory, enabling Tracy to land on top of Rip Morgan and pins him to win the match for the Young Pistols. Next was the no disqualification match pitting Terry Taylor with Alexandra York taking on the Z-Man. They said that the reason for the no DQ match was because they had previously wrestled in matches where one match ended a time limit draw, another match Taylor was disqualified, another match Z-Man was disqualified. Two good wrestlers. I mean, the late Z-Man, who we know as the late Tom Zink, had gotten a bad reputation over the years and supposedly had an ego. Taylor, on the other hand, I stand by what I say. Terry Taylor, one of the biggest ass-kissing cocksuckers in wrestling, since he went back and forth from WWF to WCW from the Red Rooster on. The point is, eventually late in the matchup, the Z-Man hit a super kick, but it was more like a crescent kick, and nothing to do with Pillsbury crescent rolls. You know, it wasn't even like a Shawn Michaels super kick. Z-Man hit a power slam, and here's a funny moment. Taylor gets a hold of Z-Man's leg, and Taylor, you can hear him clear as day. He says, I'm tired of this shit. And Jim Ross was basically repeating, he says, you hear Taylor say, I'm getting tired of this. And at that moment, Z-Man hit Taylor with an enziguri. So maybe so quite the timing on that, I suppose. Z-Man hits a body press from the top rope, but Alexandra York comes on the apron, distracts the referee long enough for Z-Man to see why the referee isn't counting. And then Taylor schoolboys Z-Man with a handful of trunks to pin him to win the match. And after the match, Z-Man knocks Taylor out of the ring. Taylor comes back in. Z-Man hits him with an atomic drop, and Taylor stayed out after that one. During this matchup, they pointed out in the crowd, and they were on camera, Nikita Koloff and Hiro Matsuda. Matsuda, for those who don't know, trained the likes of Hulk Hogan, Ron Simmons, and Lex Luger. Next was Paulie Dangerously's interview segment, The Danger Zone. And Paul comes to the ring dressed up as a matador, and he's wearing a sombrero on his head. And his guest was El Gigante, who later became Giant Gonzalez. And Paul was trying to tell Gigante about Gigante was going to referee a cage match between Ric Flair and Sting. And Gigante, we know his English wasn't very good. And, you know, Paulie eventually hits him in the face with the sombrero. And Gigante grabs Paulie, scoops him up for a body slam, and then Gigante puts on the sombrero. And before leaving the ring, he says, "No one hits me in the face." And then he left the ring wearing the sombrero on his head. Then from there, Tony Schiavone interviews Hiro Matsuda and the Great Muta about the first ever WCW Japan Super Show, which was happening a month after this pay-per-view. And they mentioned that Muta would be facing Sting one-on-one. And just as the interview was winding down, Muta spit the green mist out of his mouth. Up next was a battle, I guess a Haas battle, a Haas fight before a Haas fight was in. As we see Stan the Lariat Hansen do battle with Big Van Vader. Now, this was quite a stiff fest by both of these guys. Early on the match, Hansen hits Vader with a back suplex. They go out to the floor. They use a chair on each other. Eventually, the match ended in a double disqualification when both Vader and Hansen grabbed the referee and threw him out to the floor. After the match was over, Vader hits a impressive top rope clothesline. He missed the splash on Hansen, and Hansen, who used to play football for the Baltimore Colts, I was surprised to know, went from a three-point stance and hit a shoulder block from a three-point stance. And then Hansen was using his bulwark with the cowbell trying to choke Vader, and they brawled all the way on the ramp heading to the back. Up next was a match for the United States Championship as Dangerous Dan Spivey challenged the total package Lex Luger. Luger had an early advantage until he missed a body press, which landed him into the other wrestling ring. I think it was a good idea that they actually switched rings for the other matches, because we know the War Games match requires 2 rings. Spivey eventually hit a tombstone, a DDT, and then a regular pile driver. He also hit a belly-to-belly suplex. Luger came back with a hot shot or stun gun on Spivey, hit a clothesline off the second rope, and also hit an impressive power slam. Luger was going to come off the top rope, and Spivey was going to press slam him, but as he's grabbing him, Luger grabbed Spivey's leg, took him down, and pinned him to win the match to retain the United States Championship. After the match was over, Tony Schiavone is on the interview platform with Nikita Koloff and Grizzly Smith to present Luger with a brand new United States Championship belt. And Koloff, who was a former U.S. champion himself, he says to Luger, "You know, I take a lot of pride and a great pleasure in giving this to you." And he whacks Luger in the face with the belt and kicks him off the platform. And Schiavone's asking Koloff, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" And Koloff did this great promo. And as he does, he's taking off his suit and tie, and he ends the promo by taking the bandana or do-rag off his head, revealing that he was bald again, because I know he had hair in the late 80s. And Koloff said he was going to take the U.S. title back, and he flexed and stuck his tongue out towards the camera. Nikita Koloff was a believable character. watch old footage of him. And sadly, his career got cut short due to an injury, I understand. But up next, we have the World Tag Team Championship on the line as the Fabulous Freebirds, Michael Hayes and Jimmy Jam Garvin, who at that point had gone under the tutelage of Diamond Dallas Page, who had a few Diamond Dolls at ringside with him. Dallas took the microphone and he announced that he had an associate, a road boss, since Dallas can't be everywhere all the time, and introduced him to the crowd. It was none other than Big Daddy Dink. It was actually manager Oliver Humperdinck, who had previously managed the Samoan SWAT team, who later became the Head Shrinkers, and he also managed Bam Bam Bigelow in the past. And Dink was accompanied by 2 Diamond Dolls, and out came the opponents, accompanied by their manager Teddy Long, Ron Simmons, and Butch Reed, Doom. Early in the bout, Simmons hit his great spine buster on Michael Hayes. He hit a power slam on Hayes, and then he caught Jimmy Garvin in midair and power slammed him. Eventually, Reed gets tagged in, and he press slams Hayes. He goes to press slam Garvin, but as he has Garvin up in the air, Hayes hits Reed with his left punch, and I think it was kind of back and forth. Garvin eventually hits a DDT on Reed, and both men were down, and Reed eventually tags Simmons. Simmons hits Garvin with a heavy spine buster. I don't know if something went wrong there with Garvin, if he couldn't get up or something, but he did, and as a result, he eventually took Simmons power slams Garvin. Michael Hayes kept having to come in and break up the pins. Big Daddy Dink comes up to the apron. At that point, Teddy Long throws something to Reed. Reed catches it. He goes to hit Hayes, but Reed ends up hitting Simmons with it. In the meantime, Garvin's struggling to get up, and Dink, Big Daddy Dink, he pushes Garvin, so Garvin gets on top of Simmons, and the referee makes the 3 count while Hayes held Reed at bay, and as a result, the Fabulous Freebirds became the new World Tag Team Champions. Diamond Dallas Page and the Diamond Dolls came back out to congratulate them, and then as they reach the end of the ramp, the camera didn't pick it up, but Simmons pushed Long. Long throws that object back to Reed, and Jim Ross said, the object was brass knuckles, and Reed basically did a number on Simmons, and even Long got his kicks in, and Long and Reed left Simmons laying in the ring, and Doom was no more. Up next was the main event, the War Games match. My understanding, this was the first War Games match they had done in almost 2 years. This was a creation of the late Dusty Rhodes, and it was a 2-ring match surrounded by a steel cage. And the teams on one side were scheduled to be all 4 members of the 4 Horsemen, but Arn Anderson was injured, so it was World Champion Ric Flair, Sid Vicious, Barry Windham, and replacing Anderson was Larry Zbyszko. As they did battle with Sting, Brian Pillman, and the U.S. Tag Champions at the time, the Steiner Brothers. I don't know if this was legitimate or not, but they said Brian Pillman had an injured shoulder and it was heavily taped. Pillman and Windham start the War Games match. At one point, Pillman grabbed the top of the cage and kicked Windham and also took him down with a head scissor takeover. In that opening 5-minute period, Pillman busted Windham open after throwing him into the cage, and then they went over to the other ring. Then after the 5-minute period, they had the coin toss to see who'd get the 2-on-1 advantage. The heels team won, and Ric Flair himself came in, making it 2-on-1. They go back to the other ring, and Flair and Windham are double teaming Pillman until Sting enters, and he hits a double clothesline on both men, and eventually it became 3-on-2 when Larry Zbyszko entered. Sting did a dive, got a running start from one ring, dived over the ropes into the second ring onto Zbyszko. Then Rick Steiner eventually enters. He gives the Steiner lines to both to Flair and Windham, gives Flair a belly suplex. Rick Steiner throws Flair into the cage, busting him open. Then Sid Vicious enters the cage. Sid holds Rick wide open for Flair to hit Rick Steiner with a kick to the balls. And then eventually the final man, Scott Steiner, enters. He hits some Steiner lines on Flair and Wyndham. He gives Zbyszko a double underhook powerbomb. He goes to the other cage, jumps off the top rope, hits Sid jumps on top rope with a Steiner line on Sid. Sting puts a Scorpion Deathlock on Flair. Sid used the Hammerlock Body Slam on Pillman. This was so chaotic. What a great spot it was that the face team had the heels in a quadruple figure 4 leg lock. Sting had it on, Sting put it on Flair. Pillman put it on Sid. Rick Steiner had it on Wyndham, and Scott Steiner had it on Zbyszko. Eventually, they all managed to break out of their figure 4s. Sting picked up Flair for a press slam, and he's pressing him up in the air, because the back of Flair is hitting the top of the roof of the cage. Let me see. Eventually, Sid grabs Pillman. He flapjacks him. He picks up for a backdrop, but Pillman landed gut first. Then Sid powerbombs Pillman. I don't know if he botched it to the point where the first powerbomb, Pillman's feet up to the cage, and Sid dropped him. And it looked like Pillman was limp as a biscuit. And then Sid hits a second powerbomb. And then eventually El Gigante comes out, enters the cage. He's checking on Bryan. And he's telling doing this to the referee. And referee Nick Patrick stopped the match. Gigante carried Pillman out of the cage. And Tony Schiavone announced that Flair's team had won the match. The War Games match. And even though it wasn't not everybody was a horseman on the team, but it was the first and only time the horsemen ever won a War Games match, I understand. They would lose them to Dusty Rhodes and company throughout the 80s. They lost one to the NWO at Fall Brawl 97. But yeah, this was quite a show. Even though, as 1991 went on, WCW would kind of take a turn for the ridiculous with a lot of gimmicks. But the point is, a lot of stuff stood out on this show. Sadly, the following have since passed away. Dusty Rhodes, Junkyard Dog, Brad Armstrong, Bobby Eaton, Buddy Landell, Tracy Smothers, the Z-Man, Hiro Matsuda, Vader, Butch Reed, Big Daddy Dink, and Brian Pillman. They were all on this event, and they have since passed away. Definitely I enjoyed this a long time ago, and it was great to watch it again. So let me know if you want any more WCW, ECW, or even old WWF pay-per-view reviews, folks. Because I thought this was a pretty good event.